Kenny and Renny Show is brought to you by Johnston Group, Vittorio Rossi, Trans-Canada Brewing, Lou Ferlin, Cambrian Credit Union, and Homefield.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny Show following one of the greatest of eviscerations that I have ever seen in sports anywhere in my life. And no, I'm not talking about the Vegas Golden Knights closing out the Winnipeg Jets in 5 games in the first round, winning a game 4-1. I am talking about, and it is insane to me. It is insane that a game in which a team, is eliminated from the playoffs in a series that we should need to talk about, and I don't even know if we can possibly get to it, where we can talk about, this series being very much a representation of what we saw from the Winnipeg Jets this season, some of the highs that they were capable of, a lot of the lows that they were capable of. It's almost impossible to get to that. It's almost impossible to tell the story of maybe being the end of an era here and how things went out and how we saw the players go out on the ice, although that probably shouldn't be hard because of what I'm getting to here. I've never seen anything in sports quite like what we saw from Rick Bowness, who entirely pulled the curtain back on this organization, pulled the curtain back on the leadership group of the Winnipeg Jets, pulled the curtain back on some of the things that he's been dealing with for a long time, that we talked about on the show, that we knew that he was talking about. I've never seen anything like Rick Bowness going off on his team following a loss than what we saw here after this game. Blew me away. Rick Bowness, if you haven't caught up with this, entirely eviscerating his team, calling them out for a lack of effort, saying he was disgusted with their lack of effort, saying it's the same thing that this team has been dealing with since January, February. This is clearly something he's thought about this team for an extremely long time. I guess you can't say, I would think you cannot, eviscerate like your team like this in the middle of the season, even though he did at times, talked about it, called his players out, tried to see what kind of, response they would have. It is clear. Rick Bowness does not think highly of the leadership group of this team. He called out their pride, said they had none, said they had no pushback, pointed to the best players on the Winnipeg Jets and said they were nowhere near the level that the best players of the opposing team were. Didn't think he really tried, that they really tried to get back into this series. Rick Bowness dropped a nuclear bomb, the likes of which I've never seen a coach do before. And I don't know. I don't even know where Canadian club is trying to go with this. This is ridiculous. I'm blown away. I am speechless. And at the same time, there is no doubt, and I don't think there should be anybody's doubt down the stretch here, that that the things that we've talked about for years with the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, on this show, how often did we talk about some of the leadership issues with this group, some of the things we're seeing behind the scenes, the tendency this team has to fall into the easy path rather than taking the hard path, the team falling into snake charmer offense because it's easier to do than the harder stuff. The fact that this team this season went down the road and was shown the way to properly compete and then entirely chose not to compete down the stretch. That's the things that we saw. You don't ever hear coaches talk about that until today. And that's what we saw, was Rick Bowness entirely pulling the curtain back on what's happening here. This, I mean, the ramifications of this, who knows what they're going to be. But I'll tell you this. This is what I take from Rick Bowness. I don't know if Rick Bowness is going to be the Winnipeg Jets coach next year. I don't know if that was his way of going in and saying it's someone or me, and we can get into who those someones may be, or if this was Rick Bowness walking out and saying, if this is the last that people are going to see of me in the NHL, they are going to know that lack of effort, that inexcusable lack of push or motivation that we've seen from this Winnipeg Jets team for years now, He wants to make it sure if he's going out, or whether he's going to go on to another job, or whether he's leaving and this is a swan song and he's leaving his career entirely. He wanted everybody to know that that was not him. That was not a Rick team. That was a team of players that he coached that refused to listen, that refused to give back, that refused to go down the path that he wanted to do, which is an insanely ridiculous indictment on the players in that room. We talk about players being pros. If you have a coach who comes out and says that, then these players are not conducting themselves as pros. And this is the interesting part, because I know there'll be pushback. I know for years we've talked about, players like Blake Wheeler in the dressing room, and we've got a ton of pushback, angry pushback at us for making the suggestion. Here's where you're at. You can either take a look and not believe your eyes and not realize that there was not the pushback that he's talking about, that he's just pointing out to the rest of us. And you could take a look and think that it's Rick Bowness. It is Rick Bowness, the coach with more experience behind an NHL bench, more than any other coach in the history of the game. And you can take a look and say, it's Rick Bowness who's got this wrong. It's Rick Bowness who's out of line. It's Rick Bowness who messed this up. And then side with the other side of things, or you can kind of take a look at what we've been talking about and the problem in this organization for years that I think he entirely backed this organization into a corner now to deal with. Here's where it goes down the stretch here. And I don't know which side everybody is leaning on here. But if you are Mark Chipman and you are taking a look at Kevin Cheveldayoff and what he's going to do going forward, I think your head coach made it clear tonight, made it clear to the hockey world, the group that was assembled by that GM and the culture that was fostered under that GM was not acceptable, entirely unacceptable. So when you walk out of this situation, I don't know how you go to Kevin Cheveldayoff and say to him, your head coach thinks that it was an embarrassment what your team did here today. And we've seen this is just a continuation of what we saw from them last year and potentially the year before. And we can go back down to, I saw Paul Friesen from the Winnipeg Sun was talking about 2019 when they lost to the St. Louis Blues. And he was asked a question in a game that looked just like this, a lack of pushback from the Winnipeg Jets in a game back then. And the pushback that we saw in that year was the captain of the Winnipeg Jets saying fuck off to the journalist that asked the question. That's the pushback. That's the pushback that the captain of the Winnipeg Jets had in that year, not on the ice, not against the other team. That pushback came in the scrum afterwards to a reporter asking an honest question about what he'd seen on the ice. And there was nothing in the organization. There was no expectation. There was an apology. It was never addressed. The owner didn't address it. The general manager didn't address it. The head coach didn't address it. The player didn't address it. It was allowed to slide. That was the pushback that we saw then. And to me, you established a culture at that time where that's what the organization said was acceptable. We're okay with you not having a pushback on the ice as long as you go tell a reporter to F off afterwards. That's the pushback that we're looking for. That's the pushback that we're okay with. And we're going to prove that we're okay with it because we're not going to ask you to apologize. 31 other captains in the league could not make the playoffs or have their season eliminated. And how many other captains in every other sport can do that and can make it through an elimination interview without telling someone to go F themselves? The Winnipeg Jets can't do it. And you know what they can't do either? They can't ask for an apology from their captain or be contrite about the entire situation. This is the things that we're getting to. This is the trail. This is where the past of how we get to this situation here. But there is no hiding after this. Rick Bowness, a coach that is beyond reproach around the NHL, that has nothing but respect around the NHL, came out and has fired arrows, flaming arrows at the leaders on this team, the players on this team. And you better believe that's going to include Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's going to include Mark Scheifele. That's going to include Connor. It's going to include Blake Wheeler. It's probably going to include, in this situation, it's probably going to include Connor Hellebuyck. Who did not have the best of games tonight and definitely never got to the point that everyone said he was going to get to in this series. Never got to the level of stealing any series or stealing a game in this series. Every single person has been called out in this situation. And I don't know how you hide from that going forward. I can tell you this. We do garbage bag day after this. It is going to be an interesting garbage bag day, to say the least, because every player is going to get asked about this. And it's going to be interesting to see what they say down the stretch. Do they agree? They didn't push back? They didn't have enough? Do they call out Rick Bowness along the way? Do they call out a coach that is beyond reproach, who's calling out behavior that we have seen time and time again from the Winnipeg Jets? This I want to get to before Ken gets in here. I thought that we would be talking about this, and I thought what I was going to be dealing with in the chat room was a group of people who would say, you know what, without these injuries, we would have ate that team alive. And I hate that mindset. I despise it. I think it's a loser mindset. It's been happening for years. It happened when Scheifele got knocked out. Oh, they would have beat the Montreal Canadiens, who beat them 4 straight and dominated them. And the Jets really didn't show up for a couple of games in that series. But the Jets would have beat them if they just would have had Mark Scheifele. People were starting to say it. They were building that storyline all the way here. Here's why I hate that. One, it is beyond arrogant. It is beyond arrogant because the Winnipeg Jets played the Vegas Golden Knights 8 times this year, and the Vegas Golden Knights beat them 7 times. Okay, the Vegas Golden Knights, anyone who thinks that they were playing the same level in game 1 as they were in game 5 or game 4 is dreaming. Anyone who thinks that the Winnipeg Jets just were dominant and then just stopped being dominant, that's ridiculous. Get that out of your head. It's arrogant to say it. If the Winnipeg Jets would have had a harder push throughout this series or stolen a game, maybe you could go down that road, but you need to be able to think how arrogant you sound when you say about a team that lost 4 straight games to go out of the playoffs, when you say that they would have won that series if it wasn't for a couple more players. Listen, I'm going to admit 100% it played a role, and I can get into it later. I can tell you very specifically how the loss of Josh Morrissey played a role in this series. I'm not saying injuries don't play this role, but if you are okay with saying the Winnipeg Jets would have won this and they would have won in 2019 if Kevin Hayes would have scored that goal, and they would have won in 2021 if Mark Scheifele wouldn't have hit Jake Evans or got suspended for Jake Evans. This is the path that you go down. It sounds ridiculously arrogant when a team loses in 5 games or gets swept 4 straight like they did, and you try to say that, yeah, my team had that team. It's disrespectful to the team that just eliminated your team, and it's ridiculous, to be honest. The other part about that I have a massive problem with, that kind of mindset from fans down the stretch, is this idea that for all these years, the Winnipeg Jets, and a lot of times their fans, when you build in your excuses time and time again and say, we would have beat those guys if, we would have blown those guys away if, that is a great, great way to get in a perpetual circle of running it back, not addressing any of the problems that are clearly obvious, leaning on the excuses that you would have won that series if not for that, which we heard from the Jets players after they lost to Montreal. We heard that from their general manager. We heard it from their coach. Everybody leaned into the excuses. Nobody said, listen, that team beat us. Here's why they beat us. It's not just up to one player. We weren't able to get to the inside of the ice against that team. We weren't able to match that team's intensity at the most important parts of the game. No one ever addressed that. And that's ridiculous. And the reason it's ridiculous is because that's how nothing gets done. And the core keeps coming back and back and back with no changes. Clearly, there were culture issues with this team for a long time. And I can say this, it is these little kind of things that don't change. I remember, and people who've been watching this show know my feelings on this. But after the Montreal Canadiens knocked off the Winnipeg Jets in 4 straight games, and they came out and you heard all those excuses, there's one interview that sticks out to me beyond all, and it is the Connor Hellebuyck interview, where after they get knocked out, he gives the line about them being on the verge of not just winning a championship, but being a dominant team for years to come. That to me was just the height of arrogance, and what I thought it was really disrespectful to the team that just beat you. Yeah, they beat us, but they only beat us because of this, and we're on the verge of becoming a dynasty. How ridiculous is that comment? You want to know how the Winnipeg Jets don't learn their lessons when it comes to this kind of stuff? Because the culture is never tackled. A pin is never put through that egotistical balloon that grows and grows. Here it is. 32 thoughts this year. Connor Hellebuyck goes on, and he's on with Jeff Merrick, and he's on with Elliot Friedman. And he is asked about 2018. And his response is that they're on a run. They beat the Minnesota Wild. They beat the Nashville Predators. And then they go in, they win game 1 against the Vegas Golden Knights. And then these are his words: the unthinkable happened. The unthinkable happened. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. I want you to think about what that says about what Connor Hellebuyck thought about them losing that series was. But I also want you to think what the Vegas Golden Knights would have taken away from that comment. The Vegas Golden Knights, who at every point in that series found a level when they needed it that the Winnipeg Jets couldn't. And Connor Hellebuyck called it unthinkable that they could beat them. Now, William Karlsson had a great series here. William Karlsson scored in every single game except for one. William Karlsson was part of that team that unthinkably beat the Winnipeg Jets in 2018. I wonder what he thought about that comment. You're talking about bulletin board material. You're talking about not being able to get out of your own way. You're talking about being so arrogant you can't see what's happening around you and the fuel that you're giving other people. If you're the Vegas Golden Knights and the greatest achievement you've had as an organization, going to the Stanley Cup final in your first year of existence, one of the teams that you beat along the way pissed on your ability to beat them by saying it's unthinkable that you lost them. This is the kind of stuff that the Winnipeg Jets have never been able to root out. And to my point, I think that this is the exact kind of BS that they just had called out by their coach. Because when it comes down to it, if you want to go and tell someone that it's unthinkable that they beat you, you better show up the next time you play them, and you better lay a whipping on them, and you better have no excuses other than that you had your very best game, your very best performance of your career, and there was nothing left to give. That clearly was not the Winnipeg Jets in this series. I don't care about their injuries. I don't care about any of that. It's what you show with what you have. And based on what the coach said here, the Jets didn't come anywhere near close to showing what they had to show. That's my take on this. I didn't mean to go on that long. I had to because Kenny was taking care of business. Clearly, that's a curveball that's thrown by the head coach on the way out the door here at the end of this season. So let's get Kenny's take on this whole thing. I'd like to read more of yours too, because I've just been going off, but let's bring in the man with the best music in the business to take on this absolute bombshell dropped by Rick Bowness. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, there's absolutely nothing left for me to tee up with this. This is maybe the biggest mic drop I have ever heard from a coach, not just in the time that I have been in sports journalism or in journalism, period. I can't remember anything that was like this. Like even some of the great rants, like the "they are who we thought they were" rants over the years, the playoffs rant over the years where coaches somewhat called out their team. I've never seen something like this before. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we saw a similar message from Rick Bowness after the San Jose game, Sean. I mean, he questioned that was the first time he basically questioned their pride and said if those guys think they're trying their best, they're fooling themselves essentially. So, well, I mean, it was certainly interesting. I mean, Rick did warn us on the way in, Sean, that he wasn't going to be staying long. Literally, by the time I looked for the microphone, it was already handed off to our pal Jeff Hamilton, and by the time Jeff was done, Rick's like, "That's it," and walked off the stage. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot else left to say, I guess would be one way to put it. But I was not expecting that, Sean. You know what my theme. You know what my theme of my column is. That'll soon be posted at sportsnet.ca. And Rick's quotes were right in line with what I was writing about how it's time for the Jets to break up the band. I mean, it's there were a few hit singles in there, but this is not a sell out the world tour for the next 10 years type of team anymore. It's time for them to make some changes to the core group, and I cannot imagine any scenario after what happened today that either Kevin Cheveldayoff or Mark Chipman don't look at one another or look in the mirror and say, well, you brought Rick Bowness in because of his direct approach and his honesty. Yeah. I don't think you could be any more honest than what Rick Bowness just was at the podium. And Sean, here's the other part. We often talk about, he only went for a minute. You know what? There wasn't high volume in terms of the words.
Oh my God.
But what he said could not be misinterpreted. It could not be misinterpreted. Those were direct shots at players that have worn Jets jerseys this year, some of whom will be wearing other teams' uniforms in October. How deep those cuts go and how deep the changes go, that remains to be seen. You know very well I thought there would have been a significant change to the roster last year, but now things are changing. Now things are changing because the Jets have 6 pending UFAs in 2024, and the Jets are not going to be running it back. There will be no run back this year. It will not be a leaning on injuries or anything else in that situation, and they will be making changes. Now, will those changes result in retooling on the fly? Will they result in more of a rebuild situation? You know how I feel about that. I don't see the Jets tearing it down to the studs and embracing a rebuild. I don't see it. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. If all your offers are for futures, they may have to pivot. But to me, the Jets are already behind if they choose to go into a rebuild. And by the time the rebuild is coming to fruition, now your next wave of star players are getting close to being expiring. Sean, right? I mean, in 3 years, now all of a sudden Nikolai Ehlers is close to being done. Kyle Connor's close to being done. Josh Morrissey is in the tail end of his contract. So, and you're starting from behind. The Hawks and Coyotes are already 2 years ahead of you on a rebuild, and they play in the division that you occupy. So starting a rebuild now, to me, doesn't make sense. So you're going to have to make some very smart trades and some shrewd buys in free agency. We know it's going to be almost impossible for them to sign the high-end free agents. It hasn't happened yet. So that means they're going to have to get that second tier of player. And honestly, Sean, you talked about it from the beginning. It's not just culture. They need to change the way they build their hockey team, how they construct their hockey team. And quite frankly, Sean, bringing in Nino Niederreiter and Vladislav Nemestikov was a start to that process. More players willing to go to the dirty areas, fewer players who play on the perimeter. That's what the Jets need. And people can talk about whatever they want. This team's over the cap, whatever. Vegas has 5 lines that can play, and we saw it tonight in terms of injuries. The second pairing was nowhere to be found, and they played 2 guys that looked like they had been playing in the entire series, Sean.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
One of them played the majority of the year in Henderson.
Carrier
and didn't look out of play. Not Carrier.
Yeah.
And Carrier was involved also. I
Yeah.
mean, this is how deep Vegas is. They also have Paul Cotter, who was a regular, and they traded for Teddy Bluger. The guy can't get in the lineup in the playoffs. And the Jets are bandaging their way into trying to get through the series. And they got lots of guys who battled. But that's the difference here. I understand the series was close. Had the Jets won Game 3 in double overtime, could they have won the series? Of course. But they didn't. right? And this dates back to 2019. Could they have won had they not had a collapse on a goal by Jaden Schwartz in the last minute? Sure.
Don't
but then
go
they
down that road.
wouldn't have no-showed
They
in Game 6, Sean.
They no-showed in Game 6. To me, and this is, I went on this rant before you got on. Because
I know where you went. I know how you feel about this.
I've hated over the years the constant, we would have won if. I've said, I made it clear, I think it's arrogant. I think it's like, if you are going to play that game, you better be supporting a team that in the next chance they have absolutely knocks it out of the park. You can't tell me, if the puck just would have crossed the line in game. You know why people think that? Because people think that the St. Louis Blues would have folded the tent the way that the Winnipeg Jets did, because that's what they see of their team, and that's what they think happens around the league. They don't look and see that, geez, the St. Louis Blues went down 3-2 that year to the Dallas Stars, were down for 2 periods, fought their way back in Dallas to send that series back to St. Louis, and then won it in St. Louis. You cannot throw out that BS and arrogance about your team and be like, they would have won this series if, when they play an elimination game like they played here tonight, or they play in an elimination game like they did in 2019, or they go in 2021. I mean, it's a pretty weak 2020 elimination game that gets them gone as well. And I get it. And I understand it's frustrating as a Jets fan that over the years, something seemed to kind of happen all those years. 2018 was great. 2019 was great. And then after that, there's something that goes wrong every year. But come on, if you're just going to sit there and be like, everything's fine, plug your ears, close your eyes and say, la, 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 as loud as you can when people are saying things are not fine, this is where you end up. You end up 5 years into a situation where they should have addressed something and they never did. And half the fan base or more is okay with it because of the, in Chevy we trust mantra, or all these different kind of things. You have to, as a fan, in my opinion, you have to be on top of your team. You have to be able to point out the warts that are on your team. This blind trust stuff is what leads you to where the Winnipeg Jets are now. And it got ugly, and Rick Bowness pulled the curtain back on that ugliness.
Yeah, when you can use those kind of excuses, Sean, and say this is what would have happened when you put banners up. When you've put a banner up, then you can say you were the victim of bad luck and circumstance.
Yeah.
Until you do that, it just sounds a little bit hollow. And, man, we knew this moment was coming in terms of the off-season arrival and what it will mean and who's going, who's staying, and all of that stuff. I think the cuts could be deeper than just the guys who are pending UFAs in 2024, based on what we heard from Rick Bowness today, don't you?
You're saying he called out more than just those guys?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for
sure. Some of those guys weren't even playing.
Oh, no, I think there's squarely this is on Kyle Connor. I think in this situation, I think that Hellebuyck, I think he wasn't happy with, and let's be honest, I tweeted you at one point in the game, that shot that was in the slot that went right through him. This was not, no one can, and I know that people were trying to build that argument as the series was going on, the idea that Connor Hellebuyck's really not that bad, the Jets are just bad in front of him and all this kind of stuff. That's not the case. Connor Hellebuyck was far more than mortal. To be honest, this is probably one of the worst stretches of hockey we've seen from Connor Hellebuyck since he was with the Winnipeg Jets. So there you go, this idea. And again, I'm glad that I've been singing that from the rooftop for a long time, because the idea of playoff Hellebuyck is a myth. It has never been there before. And now add Laurent Brossoit to the list of goaltenders that outperformed Connor Hellebuyck on the way to a Winnipeg Jets loss in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, he's the second best goalie in the series. There's no way around it. It doesn't matter if you look at, underlying numbers, raw numbers, boxcar stats, eye test, any of it. But I would also say this, Sean, and I wrote this in my column also. We talked about it after the last game. That was a 69 start for Hellebuyck. He had nothing in the tank left. And that's part of that is on the Jets for running him into the ground down the stretch. I said this at the time, and I'll say it again. Someone who covers the league and has for a long time sent me a note in April. Will Hellebuyck have anything left by the time the playoffs arrive? And I think we saw part of the answer there. I don't think – Connor said everything. We understand that he always feels good, always wants to play and all that stuff. Sure. He played too many games this year. Too many games. And that was on display, just like it's been on display in some of the other series where he was outperformed by the other goalie. So Hellebuyck had a great season for the Jets. He's one of the only reasons they made the playoffs. But it didn't happen in the playoffs for him. It hasn't happened in the playoffs for him, really. Oilers series was one he definitely was the better goalie in. People can say whatever they want. He definitely outperformed Mike Smith. There's no argument on that. Sean, he did. They beat what most people thought were a better team.
I'm not laughing at the suggestion that he beat Mike Smith. I'm laughing at the suggestion that beating Mike Smith at that stage of his career, that outperforming him,
you got to beat the guy that's across from you. That's it.
A medal.
I didn't say anything about a medal. It's on the Oilers for not having a better alternative, Sean. That's not Hellebuyck's problem. He had to play well against two of the best players in the NHL.
Sure. That's just what I'm saying. Like if you're like, that's like, let's hang up the rafter.
I'm not hanging anything up. You just said he never does it. That's not accurate.
I never. Well, listen, I don't look at that series, and I don't think Connor Hellebuyck won that series. That's what I'm saying.
Come on.
Now, if you want to listen, there's a difference between winning a series and being the goaltender that wins in that series. Connor Hellebuyck is not special in that series. You don't look back at that series and think, wow, this is like Jean-Sebastien Giguère on a run. This is like Patrick Waugh. There's nothing about that. He was a goalie in a series with a really bad goalie on the other side who let in like a ridiculous game winner against Paul Stastny at some point. And I don't want to belabor this issue. I'm just saying, put it this way. Let's put it like this. If your example of Connor Hellebuyck being a playoff goaltender is the fact that he beat an extremely flawed, not very deep Edmonton Oilers team where all they had to do was zero in on two players, shut them down, and then beat a goaltender that is a year away from retirement and is a year away from giving away slap shots from the other end of the ice past him. If that is your example of Connor Hellebuyck being a playoff performing goaltender, your example sucks. I'm sorry, it sucks. It is not worthy of noting.
Sean.
It is. Yes, he won a series, and that
Sean,
goalie was on the other side.
In the first two games, he gave up one goal. The second game was 1-0 in overtime. He had to do his part. That's all I'm saying here. 8 goals in 4 games.
I'm just saying.
That's all he allowed. 8. That's a good series. It doesn't matter who you're playing and who's at the other end. Anyways, that's neither here nor there.
Regardless. Okay, hold on a sec. We got to move fast here, and we're going to move fast by bringing in the hammer. I like his music. I'm going to play it. Here he comes, everybody.
Bring in the hammer! Dropping 2 bombs, dodging shot grenades! Move over, kiss someone else's ass on something! I'm gonna make Renny shout, and the show will overtime! Bring down the hammer!
Hammer, let's get right into it. You were the only one who talked today to Rick Bowness.
Lucky enough to ask for the mic.
How blown away were you by that series, or excuse me, by that response to that series?
I've never seen anything like that. Never. I saw Rick walk in. He was kind of, when you're so angry, you're smiling almost. Like, he was so angry, he was smiling. And so I didn't know if he was going to take I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know if he was going to take a softer approach. My gut, or when this game was over, I didn't think he was going to hammer down on the guys tonight. But when he got up there and you could see, the way I described it was the water-filled rage in his eyes. Like, he looked like he was going to be in tears. And so he started by saying, guys, it's going to be brief. He warned the assembled media that it was going to be brief. And so 4 questions later, I asked for the mic. It was 4 questions later. And I just think it was very, very clear. We've talked about this over the last weeks and months and whatnot, about the frustration building with this coaching staff, particularly with Rick Bowness, and not getting enough out of his players. We saw it down the stretch where he would take that hardcore approach, right? He would be the tough love. He would call out his top end players, and as they got closer to the playoffs, he seemed to go complete different direction. He seemed to soften his approach and kind of just figure it out, or just completely change his tone. This was months in the waiting, man. He was ready to deliver exactly what he delivered, and you know what? And he put on a good face. You know, he had to put on a good face as his team was, like saying stuff like his team was playing well. Like they were absolute garbage between January, the start of that 5-game road trip in January to the March 8th. They were like 7 wins, 12 losses, and 2, shootout or overtime losses. They were one of the worst teams in the NHL. And so I just think this has been building up. And Rick Bowness, I don't know, did he quit tonight?
Okay, so that's what we need to get into. If you have more you want to say, I want you to say it, but you're going in the direction.
Look, I'm not gonna go into. I think Rick Bowness spoke for a lot of people tonight.
Well, this is my point.
I'm fascinated about the consequences coming out of this.
Okay, so let's get. I want to get into this. Who do you think Rick Bowness was targeting with these comments? What do you think he was trying to accomplish with these? I went on it, and I'll give you guys a little sneak preview of what I was saying before you guys got on the show. I think this is thrown at Mark Chipman to say, listen, your GM up there, the guy who's been shielding these guys for years, the guy who assembled this team, the guy who's been okay, because clearly we know this. Rick Bowness can say what he wants. I don't know anything about this team before I got here, but we can see what happened here this year has played out time and time again with the Winnipeg Jets. So if Rick Bowness is saying right now that the Winnipeg Jets essentially were quitters, that they had no pride, then he's saying it not just about this year. He's saying it about last year's version and the year before that and the year before that, and basically everything going to 2019 when we started seeing the signs of this team being dominant and then going to sleep for long stretches. So I think I think this is kind of like saying to Mark Chipman, this guy, okay, first I think it's him saying anyone who thinks that this isn't happening, that we've talked about the culture, it's happening. So here it is. Pull back the curtain. These guys quit. Yeah, these guys aren't trying, blah, blah, blah. But then I think it's a word to Mark Chipman. And he's basically saying, and this guy who assembled them all here and protected these guys and sent guys like Patrick Laine out of town rather than these guys that allowed this kind of stuff to happen, this is the guy you're going to rebuild this thing? Clearly, his take is these guys got to go. If they're going to be gone a year, these guys got to go. So I think it's a nod to Mark Chipman to say, are these guys doing it? Or is this the guy you really want doing this? I also think it may be a shot at Mark Chipman. Because I think he knows you're part of this too. You're the president of this team. You've seen this thing happen. Do I really think for a second that you haven't been in on the idea of protecting these players and holding these players up and talking about them? Like, remember when we were supposed to be told that Blake Wheeler was like the ultimate captain, the Mark Messier Award winner? And he just had that said by him now, by the coach with the most games behind an NHL bench? This is insane. I don't know if he just tendered his resignation or put himself in a place to be fired, but he's done this in a way that even if he is fired, if you're Mark Chipman, how do you sit back and be like, we fired the guy who said the obvious thing that you all know so that we can keep the rest of the people who won't address this? That's crazy. Who do you think he was talking to, Ham?
Top down. Absolutely. He pulled back the curtain and exposed the dysfunction that has been allowed to simmer in this organization for years. I mean, he knew exactly what he was walking into when he made phone calls after getting the job over the summer and talked to the players. Like, you don't strip your captain of his C if there isn't crazy dysfunction. And whether he was directing it at Mark Chipman or Kevin Cheveldayoff or the star players, like top end players, like I wrote about today, is Wheeler even in the top end players? I don't even consider Wheeler a top end player on this team. Like, he's top end dollars, but like
I thought he was in this series. In fairness, sure. I thought he was in this series. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was, but I almost thought Blake Wheeler, given what we've seen from him this year, actually scored points in some way. And here I am defending him, but I think he's a bigger problem in other areas besides the score sheet. I think this was an absolute indictment of the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, you know exactly what this team is all about. This isn't just some flippant rage after a series losing loss. This is a guy who's been in the National Hockey League for 60 years? Like, he's been in so many dressing rooms, not 60 years, 50 years, 40 years, whatever, player,
It's
then
5
coach.
decades, yeah.
He knows exactly how a room needs to be run. He knows the politics of rooms, and he just exposed the Winnipeg Jets for the dysfunctional organization that they are. There's absolutely, like, we've been talking about this for years, and people go, oh, you're tough on these guys. Sorry, man. The way the things work in that locker room, that's a dysfunctional room. We talk to players off the road. We talk to guys. This is a bad team. It's a bad group of leaders. It's a bunch of guys who decide who they're going to play with, right? I mean, it got to a point where they were just bold-faced lying. Mark Scheifele doesn't play where the coach wants to play, and Mark Scheifele plays where he wants to play. That's very apparent. The personalities and attitude of this team is so dysfunctional, and it started with Blake Wheeler. Blake Wheeler brought that culture into this team. Let's call a spade here. And all those young guys that were drafted have no idea what a locker room looks like. And the absolute bananas part to this is that Mark Chipman treats these players like absolute gold, and he allows them to do this. So I definitely think his frustrating comments were everyone from Mark Chipman to Kevin Cheveldayoff to the players that were playing. He was frustrated. I don't think he even cares to come back, given his statements. At least not if things don't change. That's what I saw from it.
Yeah, I think he's calling for change. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, and that's the other part about Rick. None of us have really had a chance to talk to him much off the podium. I mean, Sean, yes, you with a couple of the broadcast things, but it's hard to get a real. I mean, his feelings were quite apparent. This is not a winning hockey team. This is not a team that can win 4 rounds. So he basically said, you need to get better players. Sean, we've discussed this a lot. Kevin Cheveldayoff was trying to make some moves involving core pieces last summer, and he didn't like the offers. So then it changed to Rick Bowness going in and saying, hey, I can win with these guys because these are the guys that I have. And to me, this was another great example. I mean, the Jets have lots of defensemen in their system. Too many of them play the exact same way. Do you know why it was tough for the Jets against Vegas? They got Braden McNabb and Zach Whitecloud and Alec Martinez, a lot of guys, some of them willing to cross-check you almost in the face to get it, to keep the front of the net clear. Then they have a bona fide number 1 like Alex Pietrangelo that can play 24 minutes and be a bona fide number 1 Norris Trophy kind of guy. They have a emerging talent in Shea Theodore. They have other guys, Nick Hague, emerging also. But they aren't all small puck-moving defensemen. They all play a different role on this team, and all of them are still pretty mobile. I talked about this with Kelly on the pregame show today, guys. The smallest defenseman on the roster, I'm not including Paschal, Shea Theodore, 6'2", 197. 197 is their smallest defenseman. Shea's not even a really physical guy, but he's still 200 pounds and one of the fastest skaters on the blue line in the NHL. The Jets have Josh Morrissey and a bunch of guys that, you know, they're all guys who try incredibly hard. They all bring a different skill set, but most of them are small, you know, undersized puck-moving defensemen. And this time of year, it's hard to win with only undersized puck-moving defensemen. Brendan Dillon is not small, neither is Dylan Samberg. Both those guys can play a physical game, but they don't play the same type of physical game as a Braden McNabb does. Dillon is the closest thing they have to that. Maybe Samberg grows into it, but this goes back to my whole point, Sean. I know you didn't think the Jets should be investing, but the fact that they recognized they needed the changes up front and got Nemesnikov and Niederreiter, they should have recognized the same thing was required on the back end, especially given the contract circumstances. And I don't just mean bringing guys in. They should have moved out Logan Stanley. Guys, if they don't think Ville Heinola is on the team next year, why is he playing for the Moose? They should have moved him at the time. So,
put it into words, Kenny, it's Chevy's job. That's the point.
Move those guys if they're not going to play him.
How do you have a guy in a seat for 12 seasons, win what, 4 playoff rounds?
3.
And still 3 and possess a job? Like, I just don't get it, man. I mean, changes have to be coming. Like, this is, like, enough's enough. And I think you want to talk about getting exposed? I mean, this organization, man, holy smokes. Like, that was, I don't know. To me, that was absolutely It was the volcano erupting, and now what's going to happen? We get to talk to the players and Kevin Cheveldayoff this weekend. This will be an interesting weekend.
Hey, I just want to wrap.
Sorry,
that
and
up,
hang on a second.
We got to get to do.
Sorry.
Go.
I wasn't intentionally derailing. It's clear if the Jets make a couple of changes with the core, there's a lot of good people in that room. There are a couple players that are viewed kind of in the dark cloud category, and the Jets. I mean, Jeff was talking about it. Today was not just a symptom. It was a part of the disease today. What we saw today from the Jets, kind of folding in this game. Yeah, they got lots of guys who tried hard. Ehlers. Well, he didn't even tell us. He wouldn't be willing to tell us what the actual injury was, but he gutted it out. There's guys who gutted it out and tried their hardest. But there were some guys who were absolute no-shows in this game, and one of them is a player I have defended regularly on this program. Today was Pierre-Luc Dubois' worst game as a member of the Winnipeg Jets, and it's probably his last game. So
yeah, he had about 4 shifts tonight that, like, isolated, looked like that last shift that he had in Columbus. Like, he's clearly one of the people they're calling out. I've got this up on the board. Jason Eastman says, agreed, Kenny. I was obvious they need D, big D, like Edmonton, and Chevy did nothing. I'm just going to say it like this, Ken. I love this argument that we have between the two of us because it does show, like, there's different philosophies that you can take. And I'm not, this is by no means trying to take a shot at you because you could be right. It could be an entirely different, maybe that's what could have changed things. I think what happened here is complete, total, obvious evidence that the Winnipeg Jets were absolutely right not to do anything to invest in this core any further. Totally. Going down the road and adding more people onto this team, do we really think from what Rick Bowness is saying that they would have fixed things? Like, listen, Vladdy Nemesnikov.
On the 2 guys they picked up were set the example for the rest of the season.
Exactly. That's my point.
And Nino Niederreiter set the standard.
How much are you going to nibble around the edge when the absolute middle and core of the team is rotten, as was pointed out by the coach here tonight? Why are you investing in that core? But funny, Sean, because I say it again, at the beginning of the year, I don't think anyone was louder than me saying if the Jets have gone for it, they've gone for it. They need to throw everything that they have at this. I hit the brakes on that when I saw what they were doing down the stretch, because if they were going to give up on the season after fighting for first, why would you invest in that? What more did they need to do? How many big defensemen, how many players of culture like Nemesnikov and Niederreiter would it have taken to get on top of the mountain of problems that this team had that was pointed out by its coach? It would have been, could you imagine giving up your future for that and have your coach come out and say it after you gave up your future? Ken, like I said, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying you're right. I'm saying from my perspective, I can't see that this is anything but proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Winnipeg Jets did the right thing by not going deep and investing in this core. And I know that some of the players that are getting called out here tonight have a problem with the fact that they didn't go all the way in. If you've got a problem and this is how you respond, you are the problem.
Sorry, my point just was magnified by the loss of Morrissey, Sean. If they had got a number 2 defenseman who had term,
they'd be hoisting the cup.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
They'd have won this series.
They could have won the series if they had a capable guy on the back end.
Bullshit. The fact that you're suggesting that, I will say you're wrong. You are so far off with that comment.
You're missing the point
here.
You
belong. I'm not missing the point.
No, you are.
belong with the people who are saying right now, you know what? Josh Morrissey wasn't here. They would have entirely won that series. That is an arrogant bullshit thing to say.
That's not what I said. I said they would have had a chance.
You just said they would have won the
series. They had a chance. I didn't say they would have won the series.
Give me a break.
The better team won by a mile.
Before we go, Ken, your takes
wasn't close.
Terrible, but you look good given those takes. And you look good given those takes because the boys of Vittorio Rossi absolutely take care of you. So at least something is looking good in this here tonight. I want to give a shout out to Frankie and the boys. Went and saw them the other day. I had another suit all ready to go for Saturday when it was going to happen. Didn't happen, but man, it would have been good. Maybe I'll show it off if we get down on the road. I think Kenny and I may find ourselves on the road later on here. But shout out to the boys, Frankie and the boys at Vittorio Rossi. Head on down there. Tell them Kenny and Renny sent you. don't give up on the boys of Vittorio Rossi. Ken, quickly, I just want you guys to go quick. We can't even really get into it. Just tell me what your lamplighters were on the night. If it's Bones, that's it. Get at it. But Hammy, you go first, then you, Kenny.
Yeah, lamplighter, got you covered. Best dressed, whatever you want to say. Rick Bowness deserved all of that because I think what he did tonight is going to lead to better days ahead, even though they might not be all that great in the near future.
Stone's goal is the lamplighter because it stuck a knife through the heart of the organization, who got dominated in the first period and somehow only found themselves down 1-0. And then the Jets went to sleep at the start of the first minute of the second, and Mark Stone drove the stake through their heart after hearing the boos in his hometown that he loved, and he had a crazy reaction. And that's what an emotional leader looks like.
Yeah, okay. Good one, P.
You agree with that one, Sean? Are you sure?
Yeah,
is that one approved? Is that one
those
approved?
Injuries because the Jets would have won if not for the injuries. Totally. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, run it back.
Okay, hang on a second, Sean. I want to finish this so you can actually understand what I'm saying.
Hold on. We can come back to it. I got to do our thing here. You want to share with us your lamplighter, everybody? I know it's a confusing night here, but share with us your lamplighter. If you do, you're automatically entered to win a Frosty Delicious 8-pack of Lamplighter Amber Ale, brought to you by our friends at TransCanada Brewing Company. If you can't wait for Kenny and Renny to give you your 8-pack, head on down to TransCanada Brewing Company. Join them in their tap room at 11290 Keniston, where I will announce that May 16th is the date of the Kenny and Renny year-ender bender. There is a date, May 16th. I'll be reaching out to everyone to make sure that I get through to you. And it's time to lock down those tickets. Like I said, we've got reserved tickets. We've got a reserve list after that. You know what to do. I will get a hold of you. But in the meantime, share with us your lamplighter. We'll find a way to give out one of those before the end of the year. Manny Fran is the winner from last game. Manny Fran at Sportsnet. Sean Reynolds, direct message me. Send me your full name and send me an email, and I will send you a voucher for a Frosty Delicious 8-pack of Lamplighter Amber Ale, brought to you by our friends at TransCanada Brewing Company. Guys, your Johnson Group got you covered. Play of the game. Is it Bones?
For me, Ehlers coming out of the bullpen. I think Bonus's thing is self-explanatory, and I think Jeff handled it perfectly.
Perfect.
For me, it's Ehlers coming out of the bullpen in a time where if he wanted to quit, he didn't need to play. But this is a guy who, Jeff and I were standing there yesterday. He basically was heartbroken over how his playoffs have been going, dating back to 2018, essentially. And he gutted it out. And lo and behold, on his second shifts, he takes a clapper off the foot. Here's a guy who can barely get himself ready to play to get clearance, and then he gets a slap shot off the foot because he's getting in the lane, not flamingoing.
Yeah. Good for him. And you know what? You guys wouldn't have seen it. Maybe the people at home would have seen it, but I had him as my guest in the first intermission. And he was really bluntly honest about how hard it was to come back into that series. I thought that was really good and a really great moment out of him. So well-deserved. Got you covered moment of the game, brought to you by the Kenny and Renny OGs, the Johnson Group. You won't find two businesses with the same challenges, but you will find 30,000 businesses with Chambers Plan employee benefits, proudly administered by our friends at Johnson Group. Chambers Plan is Canada's #1 plan for employee benefits because it evolves with the way you work and live. The plan is run as a not-for-profit designed specifically to support small businesses, and its unique pooling strategy keeps rates stable, so you won't have any surprises at your next renewal. Chambers Plan now comes with professional consulting on key financial, legal, and HR issues, and Teladoc telemedicine services are included with every health option. See how Chambers Plan can benefit your business by visiting chamberplan.ca. Ken, I'm just going to get you to give a shout out to Sweet Lou because we're already 54 minutes into this show.
On. Yeah, for all the folks who have realty needs that they would like to have met, whether you're buying, selling, curious about what the house on the corner is going for, or looking to move to a new neighborhood, you can contact Lou Ferlin at Royal LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@louferlin.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca, and his website with all of his listings, louferlin.ca. Lou Ferlin, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of the community, including the podcast community, and for which we are thankful he is one of the sponsors of our show.
Absolutely love Sweet Lou. Sweet Lou would have called out the Winnipeg Jets tonight. I guarantee you that.
Time ago.
Absolutely. Here, hold on. Hey, let's. It was called for earlier. Let's do this because we're going to try and get everything in. Let's make this a Sean's Headband version of the Kenny and Renny Show. All right, Ken, close out that point you wanted to close out.
Sorry, my point was that without Josh Morrissey, the Jets couldn't rely on Neil Pionk down the stretch playing on one leg. They needed someone to assist in that category. They needed a guy that could be a big-time minute muncher. Yes, their guys pulled together and did the best that they could. My point is, get someone with term like Nemesnik or a Niederreiter without giving away your top-end prospects. I'm not saying they missed the boat on Chychrun. Chychrun barely made an impact. He got hurt right away. So you could start implementing changes without just getting a number one guy. Those guys are almost impossible to find. That was all.
Yeah, well,
Get some guys that care.
And then
first, you know?
Pionk played well down in this playoff round, but he wasn't healthy. We know that. He admitted it on the podium.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Hey, listen, I should get into this quick because I've got some insight on this that's pretty important. I can tell you this. Josh Morrissey, and I'm not saying injuries didn't play a role in this series. I just hate it could have gone the other way. Like, I think what we saw here tonight proves that it almost never would have gone the other way for the Winnipeg Jets because teams that quit don't win, right? So even if the Jets would have got past here, if you're willing to quit the way that they quit there, it's probably that quit is coming somewhere down the line. Give credit to the Vegas Golden Knights. They came out in the first game, got pumped in the first period of the second game, and then started working their way into the series. There was no panic, and one thing that they did not do was they didn't quit. They got better as the series went on. That tells me that team is going to win every time. But the Josh Morrissey loss is absolutely huge. I talked with Neil Pionk about it. We did a story about it in the broadcast. I talked with Bones about it today before the game. The Jets like their defensemen not just to join the rush, but to often lead the rush. They weren't allowed to do that after Josh Morrissey was gone anymore, okay? The reason they weren't, Neil Pionk couldn't find himself up ice like that because he needed to take too much ice time. He needed to be back to defend. So as soon as Josh Morrissey went down, an entire tool that the Jets went and used often this season with their defensemen leading the rush, they couldn't do it anymore. It was gone. So no doubt, and I'm not saying that for a second, injuries didn't play a role in this series. I hate when people are trying to say that, especially when the Jets go out like that they would have won. If not for that, that Vegas Golden Knights, it's disrespectful to the Vegas Golden Knights.
I said they would have had a
Absolutely
chance.
turned it
That
on
was all.
in this series.
Vegas was the better team, and it wasn't close. No matter what they say.
Guys, Rick Bowness, is he still going to have a job with the Winnipeg Jets, or are we going to see Rick Bowness with the Winnipeg Jets next season?
Go ahead, Hammer.
I think so, as long as there's changes. I mean, he can't, like, you think that the way the players handle themselves after hearing that are going to somehow change? No. I mean, this is a guy who is absolutely screaming for accountability. And so
yes.
unless something, I mean, we're going to get a good idea on who's accountable come the weekend when who decides to bail on the pressers. Because there's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a full sheet of players.
Yes, and
fans are going to get a real good idea on who's accountable to the fans and who's not. You can hate media, you can do whatever you want. These guys come out and explain stuff to you. Explain why they're changed, but we're the ones that ask the questions. We're not the ones who live and die with the Winnipeg Jets. So is Bowness going to be back? I hope so. And I hope he's got different company around him and a group of players that want to compete night in and night out and actually have some perspective of the fact they play in the National Hockey League. And it's a pretty good life because you guys don't hang around this team like we do. There's, you saw the frustration of the guy who goes to war with these guys. Like that's if you don't realize how big, and I tweeted this, if you don't realize how big of a disaster this organization is, Rick Bowness just told you to your face. So we're going to find out a lot more in the coming days. If Rick Bowness is here or not, he's under contract, so I'm assuming he will be, but not under these circumstances, that's for sure.
I'd be curious about Rick's health also is a big issue
That's
here, and
I
think that part of the reason Rick can be as truthful as he is, and hey, not just Rick is being truthful. We know this, guys. Bruce Cassidy, absolute breath of fresh air. John Cooper dropping a bomb today saying, see you back in Game 7, basically saying, don't worry, the Leafs won't close it out in game. Without saying it, he basically said, history has shown us the Leafs won't close the series out. So it's refreshing. So will Rick be back? I think he would be welcome back.
It'll be his decision.
It'll be up to him. Will his health allow him? I would, in this case, Rick we would not see it today, but a long off season may benefit Rick when it comes to getting his health back in order. We know he had trouble with COVID in October. Outside of that, I'm not 100% sure. I don't think that Rick Bowness would want to be part of a rebuild. I don't think that lines up with, like, one of the reasons he's back is because he thought he was with a Stanley Cup contender, and he ended up being with the bubble team.
Really?
Sean, why else would the only thing he hasn't done is win the cup. He didn't just come here to help instill culture. He thought he could win with this group. All of the coaches who are in the running. What's that?
I was just going to say I agree with that, but I also think he wanted to be a head coach, and I don't think he was getting any other offers in Winnipeg.
Yeah, no, and that's totally fair. But he wasn't going to take an associate offer with the lousy team either. So
yeah, sure.
I don't.
Okay, hold on a sec. Do we really think like okay? So what happens here tonight gets exposed, and it's something we've all known for a really long time, right? None of us here is surprised that we're surprised Rick Bowness said it, but we're not surprised by the content of what he said. Right? So do we really think it is such a secret around the NHL? I don't think it is. I don't think it's been for a long time. I think I've said as much. I don't think it's a secret around the NHL how people think of the Winnipeg Jets core now. Either Rick Bowness thought, it can't be that bad. I can fix this, and it was a confidence in himself. Or I'm not so sure that he thought he could win the Stanley Cup, and that maybe what he thought he was doing here was to come and root out the issues. We had this conversation about Tortorella and how he'd said to me, his thought is that the job of a new head coach is to walk in the first year. Half the job of a new head coach is to say to management, these are the guys who are pulling on the rope. These are the guys who need to go. If that's not what Rick Bowness did there tonight, I don't know what it is. I do have to say, just to hammer home how huge it is what he did here tonight. Guys,
massive.
Would we not have heard from from Paul Maurice? If that was Paul Maurice presiding over that, would we not have heard from Paul Maurice? I think those guys left everything they had out on the ice there tonight. Those are men out there who went out and they bled and they had injuries, and he would have gone through the list of excuses, and he would have talked about that team, and he would have talked about, he would have hid all the stuff that happened behind there. Hand it to Rick Bowness. I will say this. There is no one in the history of Jets 2.0 who went to battle for what he thought was right and went for battle for the soul of the Winnipeg Jets the way that Rick Bowness did on this night, more so than the owner ever has, more so than any coach ever has, more so than any player ever has, and more so than the GM ever has. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause, standing ovation. What Rick Bowness did here tonight, regardless of where he ends up, took a ton of guts. He went out after it. We heard he was a straight shooter who walked in and was going to say whatever he thought he needed to say. Now, clearly, for the survival of the team to try and turn things around, he couldn't come out and say it. But what he said here tonight, again, I say this, I've never seen anything like this from a head coach, but everything he said, I think, is the absolute truth. And I think it needed to be said. So good on him for having said that. Gentlemen, you did a great job here tonight. Before we do let everyone go, we have to hand out the Dig Deeper Award. It's time now to throw a spotlight on the comments and choose a standout for the Home Field Dig Deeper Award. I have one set aside here, right here. As simple as it goes here. T. Mackey says that presser was for Chipman. I couldn't agree anymore. Mark Chipman was down in the room before that had happened. I would be interested to see what happened in that room if Mark Chipman went in, if it was your regular handshakes around the room. I don't know that, I think as you guys were shocked with what Rick Bowness was saying, I think, I don't know that the owner and the president knew that was coming, but I agree with T. Mackey 100%. That presser was for Mark Chipman, and I think Mark Chipman has needed to hear a presser for that for a long time. So thank you so much to T. Mackey for the winning comment. That just like T. Mackey, Home Field is always going to dig deeper to find the best marketing solution for your company. Find out how at myhomefield.ca. Once again, big reminder, May 16th, it is set, it is chiseled in stone. The Kenny and Renny year-ender bender happens on May 16th. Hammer's going to be there, Kenny's going to be there, I'm going to be there, and a whole bunch of you are going to be there. Expect calls soon from Kenny and Renny. We're going to lock those tickets now. We're going to pack that place, and we are going to have an absolutely great time. Other than that, Kenny, I'm pretty sure we need to do another show because I feel like we didn't touch on half the stuff that we needed to touch on here. So we'll do so after Garbage Bag Day, which is going to be absolutely amazing. What do you got to say, Hammy?
I wanted to say this because it's one last thing. We talked a lot about how, the uncertainty going into the offseason, right? There's a good chance, like maybe even a better than good chance on some of these guys, that Connor Hellebuyck, Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, and Pierre-Luc Dubois could be in different uniforms. And I would argue that more than half will be gone for sure. We talked about how this was going to be their lasting legacy with the Winnipeg Jets, because this is going to be their lasting impression. And not only did we see an exit in Game 5, I think that's what made Bowness's comments so powerful. That when people he is a smart man. He isn't, doesn't fly off the handle, whatever. I mean, maybe he was guilty of that tonight. Who knows? But he pretty much put a stamp on the legacy of a handful of guys tonight in the craziest way possible. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
There's no hiding from that. I mean, to be honest, this is going to follow, especially if this is the last that we see.
You want big money somewhere? You want to sign somewhere? You just had your coach kneecap you.
Well, no, entirely. But if this is Blake Wheeler, this is how you'll be remembered for your career. Like, I don't know if there's another way to do it, right? Like, this is basically a guy blowing up something that happened all this year. And the fact that what happened this year played itself out year after year, this will be the legacy of Blake Wheeler going forward. Is this will always be a mark on it. There's going to be a time where he'll come back and Winnipeg Jets fans will remember him as the guy who led the organization in points all time, the guy who, came and was a great player during a certain time, but stripped from your captaincy. And at the end of the season, your coach says that about you for behavior that we've seen play out over the years over and over again. There's no way to duck it. This was trying to pop the balloon on an era that was mostly the Blake Wheeler era, and it's a pretty big pulling back of the curtain on that era. And I don't know how you can think how this cannot shape the perception of that era going forward with Jets fans. Guys, great job, chat room. Great job here tonight. We really appreciate everything all year. We're not done because, like I said, we're going to probably have, maybe a couple more shows. We'll see how we do it. We'll announce it as it goes. May 16th, just so you all know, start. Thank you to everybody. It means a ton to us that you've been along for the ride. Hammy, we've loved having you on. Ken, you're the absolute best, buddy. I love you. Thank you, everybody.
Nice job on your first full series as a host.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, big time, Sean. That was
good job.
Appreciate that. We will talk to you all after Garbage Bag Day, and we will get the word out on when that is going to be. Thank you so much, everybody. It has been a slice.
Play it.
The Kenny and Renny Show is brought to you by Homefield, Cambrian Credit Union, Lou Ferlin, Trans-Canada Brewing, Vittorio Rossi, and Johnston Group.